There's no denying it. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. And when I reflect on the 8 years that I have spent living in Italy to date, I would definitely have done things differently at the beginning to help me to integrate better into life in this country. Because my breakdown in the latter part of 2019 was definitely a result of the struggles with my integration, as well as some other things. So, what are some things that I would do differently now, 8 years later? First of all, I would be really, really focused on personal responsibility. Let me be clear, everything begins and ends with you. This is a concept that I think is lacking a lot in society nowadays. We're always looking for somebody else to blame for the reason that our life doesn't look the way we want it to. But in reality, we play more of a hand in it than we like to admit. Yes, there are some things that we cannot control. Yes, sometimes we have to just surrender and have, pacienza. But there is a lot of our life that we can control, including our perspective and actions that we take. Now, when I first moved to Italy, I think I forgot about this concept because I definitely started to have a bit of a pity party for myself. I didn't really spend enough time learning the language. I found it difficult. I said I didn't have time. That really impacted my ability to make connections with people and to feel like I was starting to settle here. I would forever be comparing, and I would be looking at things being like, but it's not like this in London, and in London we did it like that. And none of that helped me. I was not showing any kind of personal responsibility when I first moved here to make a difference to my life. It was only when I had my breakdown in late 2019 that it actually woke me up to the fact that I was the person in control of my life and I had to start doing things differently. Let me explain something to you. When you move here to Italy, it is not going to resemble your life the way that you know it. There might be some shared similarities, but I can promise you that for the majority of your time here, it's going to be a lot of differences. And so you need to exhibit personal responsibility so that you can actually make the most of this experience and not have it be something that you end up regretting. It's never somebody else's fault. Yes, people can make mistakes. Yes, systems don't make any sense. But essentially, the responsibility for how you perceive it, how you deal with it, and what steps you take next rests very firmly on your shoulders. I would also educate myself better on the reality of life here in this country. I moved to Italy completely naive. And on the one hand, naivety protects you in a way because it doesn't tell you the full story of what you're about to experience. And so in a way, it makes the transition to make that decision in the first place easier. But it definitely doesn't prepare you for what is on the other side. And what is on the other side is what ultimately can trip so many people up. So definitely educating yourself on the reality will help in so many ways. And I mean that from all aspects of life, not just what your day-to-day life is going to be like or, what the culture is like, but also what it's like to work in this country and what it's like to deal with bureaucracy and to set your life up and pay and living conditions and all the kinds of things that you might have put in the nice to know category. These are actually essential things that you need to be educating yourself on. But as I spoke about in a recent Instagram post, I don't think everyone is qualified to talk about the reality of life in Italy. You have people that turn to artificial intelligence, but I don't think artificial intelligence gives you the full picture. It gives you pragmatic, efficient to-do lists and tells you that what you need to get done in chronological order, but it's not telling you about the other side of the picture, which is the emotional aspects of such a move. Then you have people who are in the process of moving to Italy and they're documenting and sharing their experiences and trying to teach others what they're doing. But they are too early on in the journey to fully understand what it means to live in Italy. Italy needs to be lived to fully understand it. And even then, I don't think you fully do. You just get better at it, And then you have people who are part-time residents in Italy. People listen to these creators who, talk about living in Italy for 2 or 3 months a year. And they believe that what that creator tells them about life here is reality, but it's not, because it's so easy to stay romantic about a country when you don't see it in all of its colors, right? So I really think you have to be careful how you educate yourself and who you listen to. Listen to a variety of people, balance perspectives so that you are not just solely going in with one laser fixed idea of life here. It's good to balance it out with the opinions of many, but don't necessarily fall into the trap of believing that you can come here and in a way be a little naive, because I promise you it will make your life so much harder at the beginning. I wish I had understood better the working conditions here. I moved here kind of in a way with a lot of comparison to how it is in the UK, with contract conditions, pay conditions. My first job here in Italy was less than the first job I ever took when I worked in a shop and I was studying at college. Like, it's pretty crazy, but that is the reality, right? So you've got to be educating yourself on this so it doesn't come as such a shock when you first arrive. You must also learn the language. I feel like this is a given, like, this, right? But really, truly take the time to learn it. I cannot stress this enough. I don't say that you have to be fluent to move here, because I don't believe that at all. Fluency is such a subjective concept, and I think there's always more that you can learn. But at least moving here with the basics, being able to integrate yourself into conversations with people and to understand the day-to-day running of your life will be absolutely vital. So work on that before you move and continue to work on it once you're living here. It does become a little bit easier somewhat when you're living here, because if you're studying Italian at the same time, you're constantly surrounded by the language. And depending on where you are in Italy, you might also be surrounded by people who only speak Italian too. And so this helps in a way with your studies, but you must pay attention to this area. My biggest struggles in the early days of adjusting to life here was the fact that I lost my identity. I couldn't communicate. I blended into the wallpaper in so many different social situations. People translated for me, but I was just miles behind in the conversation every single time. It just wasn't fun. And I think all of these little things led to my breakdown, because I just didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't feel like I had a personality. And even the simplest of actions here, like going to the supermarket, felt like a huge effort because I didn't understand anything. And when I look back on those moments now, I just wish I could have shook myself and said, just study the bloody language, because that was the thing that was holding me back the most. And for some reason, I had so much resistance around it, like using, those stereotypes of, oh, well, it's harder to learn a language when you're older, and but I'm always working, I don't have time. And to be fair, I was always working. I used to get up at 4:00 in the morning to go to work in Napoli, and I used to come home at like 5:30, 6 o'clock, but be absolutely knackered. So it was hard, but I could have made it happen if I wanted to. There's so many times in life when we say, oh, it's not possible to do that, I can't do that. But it's not the fact that it's not possible, it's just deep down you don't really want to do it. And I think that was the situation for me. I didn't want to go back to school and learn something new necessarily, I guess. I was still trying to have some fun with the experience. So it's this. Learn the language, get serious with it as early as you can, and continue to learn it when you're here. I can tell you now that being able to speak with people and being able to understand so much more has transformed my integration and my life. And I've got friends here now as a result. So make sure that you pay attention to this. I would also spend time working on yourself, because let me tell you something, you take you wherever you go. So many people move to Italy and treat Italy as a band-aid or a plaster to their problems. Oh, my life will be so much better when I live in Italy. Oh, I can't wait to escape the troubles of my country. Italy is where it's at. But in reality, Italy gives you a prettier backdrop to your existing problems. It doesn't remove them from you. And at the beginning, it's like a distraction because you're adjusting to things and everything's new. But fundamentally, when you stop and things start to normalize, that's when those problems surface again. And I honestly think that was my kind of situation when I moved here. I was so caught up in the honeymoon period of like moving to this country, adapting, trying to get everything done before Brexit happened, that when I actually stopped, everything just bubbled to the surface. All of my insecurities, all of my kind of anxiety, everything bubbled to the surface. And essentially it taught me this: you take you wherever you go. And so you've got to do the work on yourself. I did the work on myself in the time when we all had to stop and be at home, that period back in 2020. And so I did that work on myself then, and it radically transformed things for me, because what I realized was that I was self-sabotaging and holding myself back in so many ways, like, not taking the time to learn the language, for example. And it was really destroying my experience here in Italy. So do the work on yourself. Whatever you're not happy with now in your life, start to see what you can do differently to change that. Tying it back to what we spoke about at the beginning, taking personal responsibility for your life, okay? And also being realistic about the life here in Italy. How are you going to manage with that, knowing that you're not happy with certain aspects of your life too? You've got to look at all of the pieces of the puzzle, put them together, and somehow understand how they can live in the same picture. I would also seek connections sooner. Now, this was my biggest problem, I think, when I moved here, was that I felt quite isolated and lonely for the first year to year and a half. It was only when I got out of my own way and actually started making connections with local expat groups that it really changed my experience. I've said it in nearly all of my videos where I talk about this kind of thing, that expat group changed my life in Italy, for sure. It brought me back my confidence. I got to meet local people because they too joined that group to practice their English. I made friends. It just made me feel like me again. And so you've got to be seeking those connections, but a lot sooner than I did. I didn't think about it until I'd already moved here. You should be thinking about it before. There are plenty of online forums that you can go into to start to connect with people that are in the areas of Italy you're interested in. Always enter these kinds of public domains, I would say, with an air of caution, because sometimes you can find a lot of negativity in those spaces and sometimes they're not as supportive as they may seem. But I think, if you can see past all of that, you will definitely find people that you can connect with in those spaces. I've got my community, the Aperitivo Lounge, which you can also consider being a part of, because that has people already living here in Italy, about to make the move and planning their move at the same time. So we've got people in all aspects of their journey within that space. And so I think it's this: you must absolutely make connection a priority, because there's something about this experience that can make it feel like people around you don't understand. Now, what I mean by that is that a lot of the locals don't really know what it means to uproot their life and move somewhere else, unless they too have done it or they know someone who has. A lot of people live in Italy and stay in Italy for the rest of their life. Not everyone, but a lot of people do. And so when you move to this country, people look at you like incredulously, like, why are you here? We want to go where you live. And so you have to accept the fact that people are not necessarily, locals anyway, going to get what you're going through. But if you can connect with people in these expat communities, they will. And that can give you some much needed support in the tougher moments. Now, there is a kind of theory that you shouldn't lean too much into these kinds of communities, because you do need to balance your connections with the locals. And I completely concur with this, because essentially within these kind of expat circles, it can get quite cliquey sometimes. And also, you can feel a little bit disconnected from everyday life because you may not make connections with locals within these groups. It depends really on how they're organized. But at the same time, at the very beginning, you need that sense of community. You need the people that can understand what it means to have done what you've just done. And you're not necessarily going to find that from the locals, but also those connections with the locals are going to take a lot longer to make. And not only that, but you've got to be able to accept the fact that you're always going to be a little bit of an outsider to an Italian, to a local, because they didn't grow up with you, they don't know anything about you, you might not have any kind of links or heritage in this country. And so for this, you need to have other forms of connection here, because solely waiting to make connections with the locals means that you're going to be isolated for quite some time. A friendly hello on the street is not an invitation to lunch the next day. There are always exceptions to the rule. If you work somewhere, if you have the opportunity to meet people in like an educational setting, for example, chances are you may make those connections sooner, but it's not a blanket rule for everyone. And so I always think it's better to err on the side of caution and come here already prepared with some connections behind you, so that the whole experience doesn't feel so daunting like it did for me at the beginning. I would also show up more, even when I didn't feel like it, because here's the thing: when you start getting into the normality of everyday life here in Italy, sometimes it feels like an effort to go out. Sometimes you're just tired from work or from life or whatever, your situation is. And it's an effort to go and mix in a social setting. It's an effort to go to the local bar just so that they know your face and you can start to feel community. It's just an effort when the weather's raining outside to want to do anything at all. And I think at points in the beginning, I was a little bit like this. I would be absolutely cream crackered knackered by 6 p.m. on like a weekday when I worked at the Montessori school in Napoli, because I used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning every day, that it was an effort for me to want to go out of an evening. And often I didn't. Often I would have an aperitivo and then I would go straight home. But that was wrong in a way, because I missed out on some social events and things that were happening within the expat communities because I was so tired from work and I didn't feel like showing up. And I think as well that when I had my breakdown, a lot of that was because I was just tired of the fact that this integration wasn't happening the way I thought it would, that, I hadn't presented my best self, I felt, in some situations because I couldn't communicate. And so in a way, it was making me become very introvert and very into myself, which wasn't helping at all with the end goal, which is to integrate. So you must show up as much as you can, even when you don't feel like it, especially when you don't, because I promise you, life has a funny way of showing you that in those moments when you don't want to do something, they are exactly the moments when you should. And they usually end up being some of your best moments too. I would also be more patient. Now, one thing that I think I've struggled with the most in 8 years of living here is my patience. I am a pretty impatient person, it's true. When I say something, I do it. This is my character. And so when I ask something of somebody else, I almost expect the same kind of speed, but that's not how it works here. Life here takes its time. And so I have to realize that patience is the only way to navigate it and to integrate yourself into life here. You've got to have patience with systems and bureaucracy. You've got to have patience with making connections because, as I've said to you before, it's not going to happen overnight necessarily with every local person that you meet. And so all of it just requires you to step back a bit, take a deep breath and be like, okay, pacienza, right? And so this is a huge thing that I definitely would do differently now. If I were moving here and I wanted to make my integration smoother, I would have more patience from the beginning. I would also stop comparing. This is huge. Stop comparing your old life to your new one. It will do nothing but bring misery to you, because I had this a lot with my work. Oh my goodness, I was comparing my working conditions so much at the beginning that I think I bored myself to tears. I was also comparing just the way of life and, systems and the cost of things. Some were good comparisons, but for the majority, they were negative ones. And also I made myself feel rubbish because I would pit myself against other people who had moved here, who had learnt the language quicker than me, who had made more friends than me at the beginning, and use that as a weapon against myself. So just be so careful with comparisons. Sometimes I think it's just better not to do it at all. And I do it less now compared to before because I realize that you can't really compare Italy. You know why? Because nothing is really unified in this country. And so yes, you can talk about things being different, of course, but there's no sense in saying, well, one part of Italy does it like this. Why doesn't that other part do it like that? I can say, why isn't Italy unified? This is true, but there's no sense in pitting parts of Italy against each other because this is just the way it is here. So just don't compare. This will help you so much to integrate better into life here by just accepting things for what they are. Does it mean I understand everything 8 years later? No, not really. But I have made peace with that. And I've become far more accepting of things than I was when I first moved here. And that is the most important thing of all. So I hope this video has helped you to see that it is possible to integrate into life in Italy, but there are some things that you should perhaps do more of and less of to make that integration easier. If you've enjoyed this video, this is the one that I think you should watch next, and I will see you in the next video.